Greetings fellow guitar travellers, it's Rowan J Parker here with episode 2 of Music Theory 101. Now this week's episode we're going to be carrying on with some of the themes we explored last week, looking at chords in more detail and looking at a thing that every guitar player, every musician just has to know, and that is the harmonised major scale. That's the focus of today's lesson, so it should be a lot of fun. We're going to get straight down to it. Episode 2 of Music Theory 101. Let's do it. So we saw in last week's episode how harmony developed from very, very basic beginnings until we arrived at the situation where we have a major triad. Now one of the questions I get asked is, why was it a major triad? Why not a minor triad or a diminished triad or an augmented triad? What was so special about the major triad? Well, the reason for that is something which is fundamental to the properties of music and in fact the property of sound. You may not know this, but when you play one single note on your piano or on a guitar or any instrument for that matter, it's really not just one note. Any single note that you hear consists of what's called a fundamental, and then a series of harmonics or overtones, which are not normally audible but actually are in the fundamental note and form part of it. Now it might not surprise you to learn that the most prominent overtone after the fundamental is in fact the fifth. And you can bring these harmonics out on the guitar just by touching the string at a particular point at what's called a node, and you can hear the harmonic much more clearly. And so after the prominent overtone of the fifth, the next most prominent overtone is that of, you might not be surprised to learn, the third. And of course if we take a fundamental and a fifth and a third, put them all together, we get a major triad. So it's quite fascinating to note that inside every single individual pitch there lurks, inaudibly but there, a major triad. And that is the fundamental reason why we gravitate towards major chords. Alright, let's look at the major scale next. The fundamental basis of all Western music is this scale, and we know it today as the major scale, and it sounds like this. Which we've all absolutely heard at one time or another. It's still the most commonly used and played scale today. So what were the origins of the scale? Where did it come from? Well, originally this scale was one of the original ancient church modes, and it was called Ionian. It also had another name. A long time ago this scale was known as a modus lascivius, which literally means the wanton mode. And actually this mode was considered unsuitable for the worship of God, because you've got to realise at the time we're talking about, the study of music was a province of the church. And the major scale, the Ionian mode or modus lascivius, was the basis of very many popular and folk melodies, bawdy drinking songs and so on. And so because it had that association, it was just considered to be, well, not unholy, not demonic, but not suitably solemn enough for the worship of the Lord. So in that case, this particular scale was not used for any plain chant. If you listen to Gregorian chant, plain song, there is absolutely none of it which is in what we would now know as a major key. They are not based on major scales because modus lascivius was not considered suitable for the worship of God. So there we go, a little bit of music history. The major scale that we all know and love today was at one time the sort of scale that made you want to get drunk and have sex with dirty women, modus lascivius. So thankfully things have moved on a little bit now, and we accept the major scale as being the basis of all Western harmony. So let's get right into looking exactly how we construct chords out of this scale. Okay, so let's look at the structure of the scale. We're going to be using the scale of C major here. It's all the white notes of a piano. So we have a listen to the scale, and the actual notes contained therein. It's the notes of C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we reach C again, which is the octave. So there are 7 different notes in the scale: C, D, E, F, G, A and B. So each one of these 7 notes we can construct a chord upon. So in that case there will be 7 chords, all in the key, all generated by the C major scale. So let's go ahead and look at exactly how we do construct chords. Okay, this is the basis of triadic construction. Let's begin on the first degree of the scale, which is C, and we take that as the first note of our first chord. So, to construct a chord or a triad, we take the root and then we take 3 notes up, which is the interval of a third, and then we take another note which is 5 notes up. So we have a chord which consists of a root and then a note a third above that, a note a fifth above that. So we have the notes of C and the note of E and the note of G. And this, unsurprisingly, since we're in the key of C major and it's the first chord in the key of C major, built upon the note of C, doesn't take a genius to work out this is a C major chord or C major triad, and that's the first chord in the key of C. Now, to generate the remaining chords in the key, we just do exactly the same thing. So now we'll go to the second degree of the C major scale, which is the note of D, and we do the same procedure. We take a root and then a third above that and then a fifth above that. And if we take those 3 notes together, that is D, F and A, which is a D minor chord or D minor triad. Now, sometimes at this point students ask me, well, how come it's D minor, why is it not D major? Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, if it were a D major chord, it would contain these notes: D, F sharp and A. Now, if we think about the notes in a C major scale, which is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, there is no F sharp in a C major scale, so it cannot be a D major chord. Furthermore, the interval between D and F, which is the root and third of the D minor chord, is an interval called a minor third, and this defines the chord quality as being minor. And here's another reason: because I'm telling you that the second chord is D minor, just accept it. So the second chord in the key of C is D minor. Now let's move on to the third degree. The third degree of the C major scale is E, and we're going to build up a triad starting on E, and we have E, then a third above is G, then a fifth above that is a B. E, G, B. And if you can just listen orally, you should be able to tell, yeah, this is another minor chord. This is an E minor triad. So far we've got the first 3 chords of the key. We have C major, which is chord 1, D minor, which is chord 2, and E minor, which is chord 3. So we just need to continue now. Let's go to the 4th degree of the scale, which is F, and building up our triad on F. We have an F, and then a third above that is A, and then a fifth above that is C. And this would be an F major triad. This is the chord of F. And continuing on to the 5th chord of the key, which is G, we have G, and then a third above that is B, and a fifth above that is D. Which you can probably hear is a G major chord or G major triad. Then pushing on again, chord 6, built on the note of A, is A, a third above that is C, a fifth above that is E. So we have this chord, which is A minor. And then onto the last chord of the key. It's a bit unusual, this one. Let's listen carefully. We have B, which is the 7th degree of the scale, then a third above that, which is D, and a fifth above that, which is F. Now the quality of this chord is different from all the others. Listen carefully. You should be able to tell that this sounds somewhat jagged and unstable and doesn't have the sort of rounded satisfaction of the other chords, which were major and minor. And in fact, this chord is not major nor minor. It is a chord called diminished. Now, I'm not going to get into the reasons why it's diminished too much. Just accept that the 7th chord of this key is a diminished chord, B diminished. And then if we move up one more step, we're going to be back at C. So all that's going to happen is we're going to get C major again, 1 octave higher. So now we've taken the entire scale and we've produced chords on every step of the scale. So if we play all those chords sequentially in order, we will hear what is called the harmonized chord scale. So let's have a listen. And you can sort of hear the sound of the scale within the chord. So I'm going to play the scale separately, and then play the chord scale. You can really hear it really just as the scale, except it seems to be made to sound wider. So it's been harmonized. There's also another name for this series of chords, and it's called diatonic. So if you hear someone talking about the diatonic chords of the key, what they mean is the chords which are generated by the scale and only the chords generated by that scale. So that's what that word means. Alright, so that's a theory of how the chords are generated in the major scale, and let's just draw a few more conclusions from this bit of theory. So we've got our harmonised chord scale, and we've learnt that we have these chords in this order: C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor and B diminished. Now this series of chords, major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, the important thing to know about that series is it is the same for every major key. So to learn or deduce what chords are in other keys, all we need to know is what notes are in that particular scale, and then we can plug in our formula of majors and minors. So here's a brief for instance. G major. The scale of G major is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp and G. So we want to learn what chords are in the key of G, we just plug in our formula of majors and minors. So G major, first chord is major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor and F sharp diminished. And that's how we arrive at the chords in the key of G with a lot less work, save us going through the bother of working everything out. So this is a very good reason why you should learn the order of the chord scale for major keys and fundamentally learn, crucially, what notes are in what scales. So as you get to the point where you can just rattle off what chords are in what keys, it's an incredibly useful and important thing to know. Here's just another for instance. Let's say the key is E flat major. Now I know without thinking about it very much, E flat major is E flat, F minor, G minor, A flat, B flat, C minor and D diminished. And I just know that with a level of instantaneous knowledge, which means I don't really have to think about it too much. And that's a level of chord scale grasp or integration that you want to get to, just the point where you just go boom, the chords in this key are this. So it requires a little bit of work to get to that level, but you certainly can get to that level. So let's just give you a few more technical bits of information just to round this lesson off. Here are another couple of ways of thinking about scale degrees or chords. Quite often chords are referred to by their number rather than their actual name. So what I mean by this is that if we were playing C major in the key of C, we could call that the one chord, And then we play D minor, we can obviously call that chord 2, and then E minor is chord 3, F is chord 4, G is 5, A minor is 6 and B diminished is 7. And back to C major, which is 1. So we could describe a chord progression numerically. So for instance, if we had these chords C, F and G, rather than saying it's C, F and G, we could describe the harmonic motion in this way. We could say it's chord 1, moving to chord 4, then moving to chord 5. And this is an extremely common way of looking at harmony and talking about harmony. So if you hear people talking about numbers of chords, like, well, what's this chord sequence? Well, it's a 1, 6, 2, 5 in this key. Well, that's what they mean. They mean the position of the chord in the key and how it progresses. So here's a little chord sequence for you to try and figure out. Let's say we have C, and then A minor, and then G, and then F. Now, if you just think for a moment, how would you describe that chord progression numerically? Well, C is chord 1, A minor is chord 6, G is chord 5, and F is chord 4. So we could describe this chord sequence as 1, 6, 5, 4 in the key of C, and that would describe the harmonic motion. So I hope that's clear enough. Here's one other thing that's useful to know. Degrees of the scale have technical names attached to them. So we've got 7 notes in our scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And here are the technical names given to each degree of the scale. The first degree of a scale is called the tonic. The second is called the supertonic because it lies above the tonic. The third note is called the mediant, which we'll come back to in a moment, the reason for that. The fourth degree of a scale is called the subdominant. The fifth degree of the scale is called the dominant. Alright, so let's just recap there. We've got tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant and dominant. really the relationship is dominated by two things. It is dominated by the tonic and the dominant itself. So if you think about it, the subdominant, the reason it's called subdominant is because it lies underneath the dominant. The mediant, the reason for it being called the median is it lies halfway between the tonic and the dominant. Okay, so we're recapping one more time. Tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant and dominant. The next one, the sixth, is a submediant, and the seventh degree is called the leading note or leading tone, and that is a technical name given to the degrees of the scale. So you could also describe chords in a key this way. You could talk about the tonic of the key, chord 1. We could talk about the dominant chord of the key, which would be chord 5. We could talk about the subdominant chord, which would be chord 4, and so on. So this is another way we can describe chord progressions. We could say, well, it's the tonic followed by the subdominant, followed by the dominant chord, giving us what I would understand to be 1, 4, 5, or in the key of C, C, F and G. Alright, well I think that will do it for the theory and will do it for this lesson. I hope this hasn't overwhelmed you with information. But this is all very, very fundamental stuff to do with chords, chord construction, and just to give you a basic understanding of the most simple sort of harmony, which is major scale harmony. Alright, so we hope you've enjoyed that lesson very much. I'll catch you again on the next episode of Music Theory 101. Thanks very much for watching. Been around Jay Parker. Farewell!